Much indeed for joining us, and welcome to the program. All right, so these public hearings ended last month, and I was just wondering, what was the general feeling of the public and the people that made submissions?
Well, it was overwhelming that these prices are much too high, and I agree with them. I attended the hearings myself in Cape Town, and it was 100% were saying these prices are much too high. The trouble was what most people were saying is it's going to hurt the economy, which is true. It's going to hurt the poor, which is true. We can't afford it, which is true. What very few of them said was, how can Eskom cover its costs without these prices? Is it possible for Eskom to fund itself without these very high increases? And the answer is yes, of course it is. Eskom can fund itself perfectly well with the present prices adjusted for inflation with maybe a bit more. 8% would be absolutely fine.
All right. So the presentations that were made were, look, we don't want to pay anything. But I guess the question might be is, what was Eskom's argument?
Well, Eskom's arguments are not quite clear, but let me get to the nitty-gritty of it. Eskom, it's important to realize the function of Eskom. Eskom's only got two duties in all of this world. Number one is to provide the country with sufficient, reliable electricity, and number two is to cover its costs. That's all, nothing else. Can it cover its costs on present prices? And the answer is yes, it can. But what Eskom must do in order to fund the new stations is to fund them on debt, raise the debt, fund the stations on debt, and then manage the debt in a responsible way. That's what it should be doing. In that case, you wouldn't need a high price increase. What Eskom seems to want to do is to fund the new stations with a huge pile of revenue, and then after that make big profits.
Are you saying that Eskom shouldn't make profits, that it should be a non-profit organization?
It is Eskom is a state-owned enterprise. Its business is not to make big profits. It doesn't have to impress the shareholder because the shareholder is the government. All it's got to do is cover its costs, nothing else. It mustn't look for a big return on capital. This is the problem. Eskom's power stations are very, very expensive, but they produce an awful lot of electricity and an awful lot of revenue. If you look at utilities around the world, their return on capital is about 3%, about 3%. Eskom seems to be looking for a return of about 8%, which is absolutely outrageous. This is why it's asking for such a high price increase. It's unnecessary.
Okay, so the return on capital is huge, but the cost of energy in these countries is much higher than here. Are we not having an unrealistic level of energy costs here?
No, not at all. Our costs were once the lowest in the world. They were too low, unsustainably low. At the moment, they're low, but they're not the lowest in the world by any means. And on present prices, with a little bit extra, as I say, maybe 8%, which is 2% real, that's perfectly sufficient for Eskom to cover its present costs and to fund the new stations.
Can Eskom raise the capital required on this low amount that the consumers want?
Very easily. And the reason is this, that making electricity is an extremely safe business. If you look at electricity, it hasn't changed in the last 100 years, and it's unlikely to change in the next 100 years. Look at Medupi Power Station. It costs 90 billion rand. You've got 6 units costing 15 billion rand each. Each unit, all it does is turn a generator shaft 50 times a second. That's all it's got to do. It's a simple business. The customer is guaranteed. It's a low-risk business, especially when it's owned by the government. Because it's low risk, because it's owned by the government, Eskom can raise debt very, very cheaply. And at the moment, the world is awash with capital looking for even a small yield. They'd be delighted to lend to Eskom.
All right, so if I get you right, what you're saying is that on a smaller increase, all it means is that they're paying for the debt over a longer period of time, and that's what they should do.
Precisely so, exactly so.
All right, so what will NERSA do you think?
Well, what I guess what NERSA will do is give them about 9–10%, something like that. And here's another thing. If NERSA doesn't give them the 16%, and I hope it doesn't, what Eskom must not do then is change its budget, downscale its budget. It must carry on with building new stations, which is able to do on present prices.
All right, Andrew, we're going to have to leave it there, but thank you very much indeed. We'll chat again, I'm sure, once that decision comes out. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
All right, so that was Andrew Kenny, who's an independent energy commentator. Okay.